launched yesterday, and we're expecting you to feed Ghana. Lots of branches to this initiative. We see how you want to use institutions to improve on cultivation of crops and to feed themselves at least. We see how you want households to follow suit. Now, I guess the question is this: what are the actual outcomes that Feed Ghana is targeting?
Okay, could you first of all, let's look at it from this perspective. Food. The problem of this country and many other countries in food security, sustainability issues is the lack of connect between food and agriculture. See, they are two different things, and if you don't get the linkage right, that is where you start having problems. And so the whole idea of Feed Ghana is just looking at our food systems and linking it to what we produce or what we cultivate. Now, you would realize that we have spoken a lot about three major initiatives under the Feed Ghana program. We have spoken about the grains and legumes, which we have called the Transformational Grains Development Program. And you would realize that we have spoken fondly about vegetables, which we call the Vegetables Development Program. And we have spoken also about Livestock Development Program. These three programs are programs that provide the basic nutrient needs of the people. And so you are looking at the carbohydrate sources, the regular Ghanaian table, the food they consume, from maize, from rice, from cassava, and so on and so forth. And you are also looking at the key vegetables. The Ghanaian man likes pepper, likes the food spicy, likes tomatoes, likes onions. And so these key 7 food ingredients, how do you invest to exponentially produce enough output to meet the food needs of the country? And that's where the Feed Ghana program comes in. Now, whilst you have identified the food needs and you are working to produce the ingredients at an affordable, price, it also means that you must look at the farmer who is producing the ingredients. What has been the key challenges confronting the farmer? The key challenges confronting farmers in Ghana is high cost of inputs, and to some extent the availability of the inputs, and to a bigger extent the quality of the inputs. These 3 key factors are factors that every program to enhance the productivity of the farmer must target. So if you don't target the affordability of the inputs, the availability of the inputs, and the quality of the input you give to the farmer, the program will fail. And so through this, President Mohammed's government has designed a number of policies under the Feed Ghana program to deal with input availability, cost, and the quality. And that is where the farmer services centers come in. Because most of the programs that have been run in the past mainly target, input support. There have been subsidies, input subsidies. There have been times where we have tried input credit. And we have tried so many forms of the input subsidy. There are times that we have tried cash dole-outs to the farmers. So we give you raw cash, go and buy the inputs and put it in your farm, and it has failed. There have been times where the funds have been given to private companies that, okay, we are giving you tariff reliefs. So when you go to the market, try and sell it at this price, and it has failed. And there are times when we have tried the input credit through private sector participation, and it has failed. And so we need a comprehensive input support program that not only combines the subsidies and the input credit, but you add an element of traceability to allow for proper recovery. And so that's where the Farmer Services Center comes in. And so you must have heard we speaking about the Farmer Services Center being a one-stop shop for the farmer. So the farmer requires some key services to make his work easy. It requires input services. It requires extension and information services. They require mechanization services. They require post-harvest management services, which include storage. They require market services. And all these critical services are now being boxed in at a one center, located very close to the farmer. And so, depending on the kind of land and crop that the farmer is cultivating, you provide tailor-made solutions for that farmer. The thing about farmers in Ghana is that a lot of people have the passion. Some have inherited it from their grandfathers and fathers and so on. And they have learned the skill from their fathers and grandfathers. But agriculture changes. There's a thing about living things that everybody must know, particularly crops. It's just like crossing two animals. When you cross two animals and produce the offspring, the new generation, and you allow them to cross each other, and you allow them to cross each other again, and you generate so many generations from one source, the same father, the same mother, what happens is what we call inbreeding. And so you would see that certain traits start getting lost, some genes are deleted, then there is deformities in there, and so on and so forth. And so our farmers are used to growing the seeds and repeating the seeds every season and going back. But because of pollination, when you grow the same type of seed, they are pollinating themselves. So as you repeat them, the performance comes down. And so that is why seed breeders, for example, would every day want to improve the variety of seeds that they have produced that is performing on the market. So it requires research and training and information. And as you improve the seeds, the input requirement changes. And so it is important that whilst you are providing the input for the farmer, you teach the farmer how to apply the inputs. And so those are some of the inefficiencies that have, confronted policy implementation in Ghana. Because most often we want the easy way out and we say, okay, the farmer needs fertilizer. Let's give him NPK 15. Then you just throw it to the farmer. The farmer is growing tomato, growing onion, growing pepper, growing soya bean, and they just use NPK 15.
Right.
And so this farmer service center arrangement is now going to target the needs of the farmer and provide that and put it on the tab so that you can track and see how the farmer performs. So then beyond that, you would realize that the thing about the food supply chain is that there must be a need for productivity, but most importantly, a need for production growth over the period, because then you have more mouths to feed, and so you know the numbers that you have to produce. And so under the Feed Ghana program, there are a number of initiatives that this government is going to undertake, led by my senior brother, Honorable Eric Opoku. And key amongst them, to improve the output at the farm level is the institutional farming thing that we spoke about. We believe that most of the institutions have the capacity to invest and produce their own food, and it is staggering to know, Kojo, that last year alone the government spent almost 2.8 billion Ghana cedi on food for senior secondary school alone. The school feeding at the basic school level has not come, only senior secondary school. And so if we look at producing this 2.8 billion Ghana cedi worth of food in Ghana, you can imagine the savings that would make. And the thing about agriculture is that everything that you put, every money you put into agriculture, all things be equal, you are going to get about 200% of that money. All things be equal, averagely. And so if we are spending 2.8 billion on food, it means that we could spend some 800 million and we would provide that food. And so what we are looking at under the institutional farming, for example, the school farm initiative, is to have an arrangement where the senior secondary schools that have lands would cultivate those lands. And so depending on the strategic, agroecological area that you find yourself, we would be able to determine the kind of crop that you can grow. Whether you do livestock, you do poultry, you do piggery, you do rabbits, and so on and so forth. One other area that maybe we'll talk about later when we have time is under livestock, the rabbits. You know, we like akrantia in Ghana. I mean, we love our akrantia. But we don't know that the perfect replacement for our akrantia is rabbits. They grow faster. Within 3 months, they are ready, and they multiply faster. If you are farming akrantia, you may need over 1 year to grow a full cycle. But you don't need that with rabbits. And so these are things we want to introduce into the institutional farming. Then it's not only the secondary schools. The prisons are there, the police are there, the military are there. I know the military, you know, already have the capacity, you know, to even, I mean, construct irrigation facilities and all that. The engineering regiment, they are doing a great job. And so we are looking at getting all these key institutions to venture into some form of commercial agriculture. And one other thing that we are looking at is to attract more private sector into the business. And so Ghanaian agriculture is basically a smallholder activity. And so somebody has 3 acres, somebody has 5 acres, and he's a farmer. And so the challenges confronting a smallholder farmer are staggeringly different from the challenges that will confront a commercial farmer. Even though there is much more capital requirements for the commercial farmer, the smallholder farmer has real challenges that has to do with the supply chain, you know, inputs, the supply chain of inputs. And so we will need to have a mechanism that will get us to aggregate these smallholder farmers into cooperatives. And at the heart of the success of all the programs that we are going to implement in the next medium term 4 years would be a law or an act that will govern cooperatives in Ghana. Because if we don't get these farmers into cooperatives, you would find it very difficult to organize the production supply chain. And so there are areas where in that area somebody is growing 3 acres of pepper, somebody is growing 2 acres of tomato, somebody is growing 2 acres of cassava. When it happens like that, it makes it difficult to market. And so somebody will grow the cassava and say, I'm not getting anybody to buy. It's because of the differential crop, you know, that they are producing in that area. But imagine that all these 3 individuals that I have mentioned, or let's say 100 of them, or 200 of them, all of them are growing cassava. You can imagine the impact that would make. And maybe because I have mentioned cassava. Cassava has become one of the critical tradable crops in the world. And it is of very high demand because almost everything that we are doing now, most of the agro and the industrial inputs require starch. And they have developed cassava even to an extent that they use cassava for noodles and spaghetti. I have seen equipments in China where they pick the raw cassava and put it into the machine. It comes out as spaghetti. And so cassava is of high demand. The eastern part of the world are all over the place looking for cassava. Thankfully, Ghana cassava can grow everywhere. But the irony is that we have made attempts to set up industrial processing of cassava, and almost all of them have failed. And I'm sure you readily recall, because of your background from Central Region, you know the Ayensu starch factory and what has become of it. The Ayensu starch factory is 22,000 metric tons capacity, starch production capacity, and for a 22,000 metric tons factory to produce starch, you need about 100,000 and more metric tons of cassava every year to feed it. Now we are not able to produce the 100,000 metric tons. In actual fact, the data says that we are producing about 22,000 metric tons of cassava every year. And so that means that there's a huge shortfall already. We are not able to produce the cassava. Then there are other factories like the Amantin one and a few others. So, Kojo, what this simply tells us is that there are people growing cassava who will tell you that they don't get the market. But it is because they are doing it at the smallholder level.
Right.
And so if we are able to organize the farmers, and we know that there are some 20,000 farmers, each of them is growing some 5 acres of cassava, we would be able to aggregate that and be able to feed the industry. Right. And so that's where the feed industry initiative also comes in. And so we are looking at not only providing food for the table to meet the food needs, but to also produce agriculture products or agro products to meet the industry needs.
Right.
Because industry needs all these basic agro inputs. And because I always say that, look, Ghana, we say that we are running a 3-sector economy, but in actual fact, we are running a 1-sector economy. It's an agro economy. Because, look, if your agriculture grows, now we are doing around 20% averagely. If your agriculture grows 1% more, it has an exponential growth in industry and in service. And that exponential growth would be more than 5%. And so if we do agric right, this economy would be an economy that will be competitive.
All right. If you just joined us, we're talking to Dr. Peter Otokunor. He's in charge of special initiatives around agriculture and agribusiness at the presidency. We're talking about Feed Ghana. So if I've got it, the general summary, the main thrust of the objective of Feed Ghana is to ensure a more effective, traceable, effective and traceable supply of inputs into various sectors of agriculture. Now, it brings up the biggest criticism against any government initiative that I can recall in agriculture, which is that we are always focused on inputs. But when we are talking about the outcomes, we are not so clear. What are the outputs we are expecting? For example, if we say we want to start, let's use Nkokon-Kitinkiti, for example. So we want to start, rearing poultry in Ghana on a larger scale. So how much of our imports do we want to substitute by, say, 2028, right? So what about that? What about the targets for the outputs? What can you tell us about Feed Ghana's output targets?
Okay. So, Kojo, the thing about output is that it's a long journey from the inputs. And so we talk about the inputs, which is very key. But in between the input and output is policy, it's regulatory efficiency, it's management, it's human resource. So that journey is very long. The reason why most at times we would talk about input and we would not yield the output is that we miss the gap in between. And the challenges in between, we don't consider them as relevant. And that is why we don't get the output. And there are two key social issues or policy implementation issues that lead to inefficiency in policy implementation. And the very first one is what we call the adverse selection. And so I have decided to do an input program. Because I know you have not farmed before. And you come and say, okay, you want to farm. So I should give you input. Then I give you 100 acres worth of fertilizer to grow maize. I give you the seeds and everything. From the onset, what I have done is that I've thrown the inputs away. You are not going to apply them very well. Because one, you lack the skills. And two, maybe it's because your party is in power. That is why you have gotten it. And so what will happen is that even the fertilizer I've given you, you go and look for somebody to sell to. Or you would sell it across the border. And so obviously you will not get the output. And that is why we have said that there was planting, but the food and the jobs didn't come. You understand? Because we didn't attach the kind of traceability and the specialization that is required. And so there are targets that we would set. And these targets, because of the experiences of the past, must be driven by data.
Are you yet to set these targets?
Oh yes, no, we have targets. We have targets for almost every single policy that we are looking at. And I mean, when you redact the data, it tells you how much that you can achieve when you put in this much of investment. What we are looking at is not, for example, let's look at grains. You know, agric is very big, so when you are discussing it, you have to be a little bit specific in some instances. Let's look at grains,
and then let's talk about poultry.
So let's look at grains, for example. And so maize. In Ghana, we don't use maize, for livestock feeding. In Ghana, maize has dual purpose for human consumption and for the feed industry. When we assess maize sufficiency in Ghana, we assess only for food. And so we assess and know that, okay, the table would get maize. But if we are going to assess maize in terms of food and feed, then it means that we will need to produce more. Now we have realized that we are not producing enough maize that could feed the livestock. And so that means that our current production, which we call sufficient, must be doubled. Then in that process, we should look at the variety of maize that goes to the table and the variety of maize that goes into animal feed, because they are not the same. Now the ordinary Ghanaian is even getting used to yellow maize. Yellow maize mainly was developed for the livestock, and so there are nutrition issues that comes in. Now our target is to grow enough maize to feed the feed industry and to feed homes.
So that means that what value, what volume are we looking at?
And so yes, and so that means that we will need to produce a double of what we are producing.
So are we targeting 6 million tons?
That means that we should be targeting around 7 million tons, not
7 million tons.
Yes, 7 million tons. And if we are targeting 7 million tons, then it means that we should be growing averagely an acre of land could yield averagely between 1.2 to 1.8
tons.
You could go more. But let's assume that it is even 1.5.
Let's say even 2.
Even 2.
So that the calculation
Let's say
is
it's even 2.
So we need to grow 3.5 million acres
of land.
Currently, we do about 1.2, 1.5 million acres.
Exactly.
Now, to double this size, it requires investment in land, infrastructure, irrigation, machinery. What is the plan for that?
Okay, so I'm sure you have heard about our Irrigation for Wealth program, which we are looking at for starters, developing about 10,000 hectares of land. But most importantly, there are 2 seasons.
What's the program called? Irrigation for
Wealth. Irrigation for Wealth.
Where's the water coming from?
What I mean, Ghana is blessed. I mean, if you
With
look at
polluted water,
not necessarily. The polluted water is there. We'll come to that. But look, from the north to the south, the water lake presents a very huge irrigation opportunity. And you should also bear in mind that if you look at the geographical makeup of Ghana, there are multiple basins that collect water from various parts of the northern part, from the Sahels. And so those basins also present an opportunity for collecting those waters and developing irrigation systems for them. And beyond the water lake, there are other water bodies that could also be developed.
Is that if you look at the Water Resources Commission report on various basins, the Volta is the only basin
that is
which
not
has
contaminated.
It's not contaminated. I agree.
If you look at the Pra basin, it's gone.
It's gone.
Tano basin is gone. Ankobra basin is gone. Brim Densu basin is gone. Ayensu is gone. And these are about the 7 major basins. So if Volta is the only one whose integrity is about intact, how are we sure that we can really roll out this irrigation program across the country and get the right water resources to feed our production?
Well, first of all, it is not all lost. It's not gone. It's a human activity that is degrading and taking away the water and the quality of the water. And so whilst we are able to fix the issues of illegal mining, we would be able to restore them. And you see, water has its own way of cleaning itself. And so if we are able to stop, it will clean itself with time. Now, the other bit of the challenge is the kind of irrigation systems that we put in place. Because, you see, for every businessman, you look at your capital and how much money that you can invest. To bring down the production cost also requires the kind of input decisions that you make. And so when we talk about irrigation, the choice of irrigation is also very important. And so whilst we are looking at developing irrigable lands, developing irrigation projects, we are looking at more sustainable and cheaper ways of sending plant water to the fields. And that is the unique thing about the Irrigation for Wealth program that we are looking at.
Let's now
so that for example, Kojo, for those of us who are into commercial farming, there are so many methods, and people would want to opt, for the fanciful name, the center pivot and all those. Last time I was having a conversation with you, and anybody who wants to go into some level of commercial farming, 300, 100 acres, they just go for center pivot. But your cost of production and your cost of maintenance alone will kill your business, and you would struggle. And so those are things that we are looking at, so that we can make plant water available, but at a cheaper cost, at an easy and convenient, approach to the smallholder farmer.
Are these just abstract conversations, or have you made calculations? Have you figured out just about how many how do we measure water?
Liters or
cubic liters of water that these new initiatives can produce, and whether it's enough for the acreage you want to irrigate? Like, have you actually done the maths?
Well, for those of us in the sector, we look at the coverage by land. We look at, and I mentioned 10,000 hectares for the irrigation for wealth. The long-term objective is to, as much as possible, try and double the irrigable land in the country. That is going to take a lot of investment, considering the lack of investment in the past few years. And so that is going to be the biggest headache. But beyond the irrigation, we should also look at putting some sustainable, efficient, local remedies to irrigation. People have started trying these borehole systems and trying to do that for the smallholder farmers, serving a few adjoining farmers in smaller enclaves. That is one solution that we are looking at bringing on. But beyond the bigger irrigation projects, there are bigger institutions that have the capacity. There are development partners that are also doing certain projects. MIDA is doing some, World Bank is doing some, and so together I believe that we would be able to increase the amount of irrigable land under cultivation. But even whilst at it, even if we manage our rainfall patterns very well, we should be able to produce what we eat. Because in the southern sector, we have 2 seasons. In the northern sector, where they have 1 season, the land size available, if we look at input efficiency, we look at management efficiency, we look at training, building the capacity of the farmer, we should be able to produce enough. I mean, you go to America, they have only 1 season. The snow takes a better part of the year, but they are able to grow food to feed the nation. And so those are things that we have to look at, measures that will make the farm level productivity increase, not only based on the irrigation facilities, because the irrigation facilities, most of them comes with very expensive cost.
Okay, look, we'll talk about the FSCs and how you're going to run them, but let's start from the ground up, which is the land. So the target for the irrigation for wealth development is 10,000 hectares, which translates roughly to 25,000 acres. But based on our conversation, you are targeting 7 million tons of maize, which requires, let's say, an extra 1 million acres of land. Where is that land? What's the plan to develop the land? Because the land alone is not going to plant itself. You need access roads, you need machinery, you need land development. What's the government's approach to ensure that within the shortest possible time, beyond your 25,000 acres initial target, we hit that 1 million, we make available 1 million acres for all forms of farming to enable us to get the 7 million tons of maize.
Okay. So you are not going to get 1 million acres of land altogether.
Yeah.
And so that's why we are bringing in the institutional farm initiative. So, for example, if we are looking at 200 senior secondary schools nationwide, and we are averagely estimating, let's say, 10 acres per school.
Mathematics here suggests you should do 20 acres to meet their maize needs.
So, to meet the maize needs of maybe 1,500 or 1,800 students.
Yeah.
So, if you are doing 20 acres and you are having 200 schools, that is about 4,000, acres of land.
And roughly we have 1,000 senior high schools. So 20 times 1,000, that is 20,000.
20,000 hectares.
Okay.
You understand? And so you look at the ones that the military will do, the prisons will do, then the smallholder farms. Then the thing also about the production capacity, for example, in maize, is that, in Ghana you can grow maize anywhere. So if I decide that under the Feed Ghana program, I am giving the farmers maize seeds to plant for this season, then it means that you are driving the production of that crop. And so those smallholder farmers that are doing 5 acres, 3 acres, 10 acres would all come in together to be aggregated to meet the 1 million acres that you are looking at. And so that is why our program is not throwing our resources in broadcast, but we are targeting. And so I've mentioned that we are targeting 7 food ingredients, and maize is one of them. And we believe that with the amount of inputs that we would supply, plus what the private sector is doing, we would be able to meet that target. And it is so for all the food ingredients. You would realize that tomato, for example, does well with various technologies, including urban areas where there are small areas you can just apply some modern technologies and grow more tomatoes and vegetables. There is hydroponics technology, there is green house technology.
Are we going to be investing in these, because they've yielded some great results around the world?
We have invested heavily in greenhouse, and what I think we should do more is to add a bit more of attention to the efficiencies in some of the greenhouses. Last weekend, after the launch of the Feed Ghana initiative program, I passed through the Akumadan greenhouse facility, and they are doing some great job. You understand? There is one company that is running the place, I think Agri-Sustainability or Agri-Sustainable Limited or something. They are growing. No, that's not Agri-Impact. It's Agri-Sustainable. They are running the facility.
And there are also a lot of abandoned greenhouses all over the country.
And there are a lot of abandoned ones. Even
so
before I got there, I saw a lot of abandoned ones. And there are individual businesses that are finding the relevance and the business, I don't know how to put it, for a want of a better word,
the
business viability of those greenhouses. And people are putting in, requests to run some of these greenhouses.
You mentioned hydroponics. Forgive me, this is a quick diversion. You mentioned hydroponics. Is there any actual government backing for hydroponics? I know there's a school in Kumasi that won an international award for a hydroponics project, which means the technology itself is understood. But is government doing anything at all to boost this?
The understanding of the technology is one thing, and the uptake is another. So what government is looking at doing is commercializing it and making it available, knowledge available, so that the farmer can uptake. If there are a few people doing it and you don't let people see the importance and how productive it is, nobody will uptake it. And so this is where government programs comes in. With greenhouse, the challenge we have seen with greenhouse, productivity over the period, and I was discussing that with you the other time. And when I went to Akumadan, I was sharing with them that look, the greenhouse facilities that we built are greenhouse facilities that were designed for the temperate, and we are in the tropics. The idea of greenhouse is to provide a unique environment within which the plant will grow, so that it doesn't interact with the external world. But because of our climate, it makes the greenhouse, rather underproductive, because you are supposed to use energy to control the environment, and the weather is very hot already, and so you are able to overshoot the temperature, and that means that you will need power to control, to blow some air and all those things, and that makes it more expensive, and the more expensive it becomes, the less productive that you are. And so those are things that we have to look at, the material for the greenhouse. And last time I was having a conversation with you, and I was telling the guys out there that why don't they change? Let's
strip all the
let's strip
greenhouses
the covering
of the plastic,
and
put
let's strip the covering
around
and put the net around. It will still give you the conditions that you want, and even that one, it makes it easy to regulate, so that you can be more productive. You spend less energy in controlling the temperature and the climate inside the greenhouse than you would use if you are
which is great. Earlier Kojo asked about funding, and I was also pushing on the land. It's all about money, right? To be able to do all these things, if you check online right now, the size per square meter of your net for your greenhouse will cost you, let's say, $2 or $3. how do you intend to fund this? Because we've seen the budget allocation for the Ministry of Agric.
Yep.
And the number of things you want to do, the land we need to develop, the inputs we need to buy, the materials, and the budget doesn't seem adequate to be able to get us to get these outcomes. So how do we intend to fund all these beautiful things you are talking about for them to give us value?
So, Kojo, the thing about agriculture is that it's real business, and is the most profitable business that exists in the world, anywhere. If you provide the right environment, private capital will be driven in there. Most of these things are driven by private capital. For example, this greenhouse that was built in Akumadan and Dowenya, all was done by government. But there are other private people who have built greenhouses. In fact, Otokunor has a greenhouse near the Bodukwine factory. I know you have heard about the Bodukwine factory.
Multi-fruit processing factory.
I mean, Otokunor is doing one great job in agro-processing. He's even built a new jute factory. But the point is, there are private people that are investing in greenhouse. And so when you let people understand that there is a technology that you can employ and be able to grow certain unique commodities that are of high demand, you would be able to make a lot of profits. A lot of people will go in there. And so it's not only about government expenditure. So we have enough greenhouses already. These greenhouses have been given to private companies, to institutions, and they are managing them. Now, if you are able to guide them and they are efficient, they produce the food without you investing money in there. Most of the initiatives that we are going to do, for example, my unit, most of the initiatives that we facilitate are initiatives or projects that are private capital driven.
Okay.
You understand? And so there are a lot of people who hold private capital and do not know the opportunities and do not know the way. And so you will need to guide them, provide a technical and regulatory assistance so that they are able to set up. And that is the way out. And you see, government alone cannot do agriculture. Government alone cannot invest in agriculture. You will need the private sector to take the lead, with government providing the push and the regulatory environment that will allow them to be productive. And that is what we are looking at doing. And so you would compare the budget of 2024 and that of 2025, and you would see that we have realigned our focus in a manner that we are efficient. You will see that the budget that was approved in 2023 for 2024, the government overspent that budget by almost about 4 billion under the guise of dry spell. But we didn't see the difference. You understand? Spending efficiency is very key in policy implementation. And so with the realignment of our budget in agriculture, we believe that will allow us to be more efficient. We have big push. We have big push, for example. Big push is looking at infrastructure, heavy infrastructure. And you know, the thing about agriculture is that it's not only the irrigation infrastructure, it's not only the mechanization, but most importantly, it's the roads that connect the sources of the food to the market. And so if you don't get it right, you would see that you would be able to produce at a cheaper rate. You will be able to get the aggregator picked at a cheaper rate. But before the aggregator moves the grain from Nangpanduri to Accra, the price would have doubled. Yeah. Because the road is bad. And so we are using all those investments to create an environment where it makes it cheaper for the food prices to go down.
We'll hold it there and take a break. But if you just joined us, we're talking to Dr. Peter Boama Otokunor, and he's walking us through Feed Ghana and how it will feed Ghana. When we come back, we're going to look at a couple of other things. We still haven't touched on Nkokon Kitten.
Yes.
We certainly want to understand much clearer what the idea is and why government is still interested in placing inputs in the hands of small holders, when indeed the problem is still big and requires a big industrial solution. Also, I don't think I haven't noticed that my question about outcomes and measurable outcomes is still yet to be answered. So yeah, just a few days ago, we saw Feed Ghana launched in Ghana, in
Techiman, yeah.
Yeah, and Dr. Otokunor is walking us through the practicalities of this project and how indeed it is to feed Ghana. We've talked a lot about a few things. We're going to now hone in on a few other things, okay? And we want to really get a clear idea of the outcomes. As for the inputs, we see what they want to do with the inputs. Now, let's see what outcomes we can measure from the work they do. And before the break, one of the areas we said we would talk about is poultry.
Yeah.
We have a massive import bill for poultry. Shocking import bill for poultry. So maybe we'll start from there and look at outcomes. What percentage of our import bill are we planning to substitute with government initiatives over the next 4 years?
Okay, so we are looking at significantly reducing the import bill by half in the medium term, and we hope to be able to do quite significantly well in the next 2 medium terms. But could you see
what's the
market?
Term?
The 4 years.
4 years. Okay.
The thing about poultry is that in the sub-region, almost all the countries are virgin markets for poultry. And so whilst we are not even producing enough, and in actual fact the data some other experts have said is understated. The $400 million is heavily understated. And so that means that we could be doing more than that. But the point is that even though we are not able to meet the needs and we are doing all these importations, the few farmers that are trying, they struggle with the market. And so most of them would have to send their products to Togo and Benin. And so that means that the potential to take over the sub-region is very huge. And that if government is able to drive investment into the production of the poultry products, we would be able to be doing well beyond just import substitution, but we would be able to take the export market in the sub-region. And that is why, of all the livestock that we talk about, we focus more on poultry. That's why President Mahama, during our campaign, proposed the poultry farm to the table, because every single household, every single Ghanaian, if you want, at least a day, takes a poultry product. If you don't take kusuani moko, you will take some fried chicken. And so this is a kind of food that we consume, and so you must produce. So what we have decided to do with the poultry farm to the table, it has two wings. We have the Akoko Nketenkete wing, which is looking at household food security and household income. And so you heard Mr. President said that we are going to give about 55,000 households the Akoko Nketenkete. And in that program, we are looking at the croilers. The croilers are the ones that can survive on free range. There are varieties that do very well. They lay like commercial birds, but they can also reproduce. Yes, they are the hard, robust dual purpose birds. And so we are going to give that to the households. Then on the commercial side, where we are going to look at the processing of the birds to get the poultry products, we are looking at some 4 million birds under the program within this year. Next year, we are going to look at expanding. So we are looking at 50 anchor farmers who are going to take that 4 million birds. That comes to about 80,000 birds per farmer. And we are looking at every single farmer also developing outgrowers to be able to build capacity and to be able to get this smaller outgrowers also to expand. Beyond that arrangement of the 4 million birds, government is also looking at attracting private sector to come in there. There have been companies who have expressed various interests in producing. Some are looking at doing 2 million birds and so on and so forth. And these birds that I'm talking about are broilers, because they are mainly grown for the meat. And within 6 weeks to 8 weeks, you have them. And so this is what we are trying to fix. But you see, there are policy bottlenecks that has engulfed the previous failures in an attempt to, do an import substitution arrangement for poultry. And so you would recall that when President Mahama was in power between 2012 and 2016, we started the broiler revitalization program. That broiler revitalization program, in terms of numbers, did significantly well. We were able to at least substitute about 60% of the imports that we were, but sustainability issues came in. And the sustainability issues are lessons that we have learned. And one of the key problems was that there was no mechanism for traceability in the conditions that we put in place. And so one of the conditions were that as a poultry farmer, or as an importer who imports poultry products, to be able to get approval to import poultry products, you should be able to prove that you have contracted a local farmer to produce the birds for you. Because most of the orders, when you place, it takes about 2 months for the Otokunor to arrive in Ghana. But that 2 months, you could produce the same quantity of birds in Ghana. And so you needed to produce a contract for that, so that you would be given the permit to import the rest, the other half. So you show contract of 50% of your total needs, then we give you approval for 50%.
Interesting.
But what made it difficult, the problem, was that we realized that most of the importers also played smart. And so that's the issue of moral hazard. So they would set up companies and just write the contract on paper and bring it to the office and say, well, I've contracted this farmer, but the farm doesn't exist.
Right.
And the approval you will give them will be the exact quantity that they need on the market. And so whilst government was doing investment in growing some farms to produce more broilers, this cartel, if you want, the importers were also trying to beat the system. And so they flooded in with the poultry products. Then our farmers also produced the poultry. Then now they had nobody to sell to. And so that is one of the issues that we have identified, which we are trying to use the new system to fix.
Okay.
Then the other issue is recoverability. So government gives you 2,000 birds, 20,000 birds. How much through the program would be recovered? How sustainable? How much do you make, and how do you plow it back into the next production cycle? And so yesterday, on one of your sister stations, I think Pulse, there was one poultry farmer who decried that, look, last year they did, under the PIS, Poultry Intensification Project, they did the about 2 million birds to 15 anchor farmers. What is the level of accountability? How much was recovered?
Was the output?
Which was the output? We should look at it before we go, because if you don't look at it again, you risk repeating the mistakes. But those are things that our technical officers at the ministry are looking at, so that we fix them. We give you the birds. We are able to recover the birds in product or in cost.
Let me check something with you, because you've given us a target. You've said that over the next 4 years you're planning to halve our import bill on chicken. Well, looking at the plan that the president announced over the weekend, it seems that it would double our local production. But currently our local production accounts for just about 13% of the demand for chicken. So if you double it, you're looking at still less than 30%. That's not enough to halve the import bill.
So, Koyo, I explained to you.
If I can give you the number so you answer that. The president says we are giving 4 million birds to anchor farmers. And 55,000 smallholders will get 500 birds each. If you put that together, let's say for this cycle, we are looking at 31.5 million birds. To be able to hit the target you mentioned, we need to do at least 100 million birds. How do we close the 70 million gap, and what's the strategy?
So it is your knowledge about the production systems that will answer this question. The birds are broilers; they grow within 8 weeks, and so you can run about 6 cycles in a year. You can run about 6 cycles in a year.
For the anchor farmers, they are broilers, but for the smallholder farmers, they are broilers. So the cycles are different.
And so you have put it together that way. But I am looking at 4 million and a cycle of 4 million about 6 times. Then let's put that aside. I am also looking at private sector doing their own. This is what government is doing. The private sector also doing their own. Then don't lose sight of the regulatory bit, where government would also put regulatory measures to cut down the importation so that the local market can grow. It's a push and pull thing. When government use regulatory measures to pull, the others will come in. Kojo, I know that you are thinking of going into poultry. If you know that, there would be an offtake. Yeah, if you know that there will be an offtake, I know that you will go into poultry. Winston is thinking of adding poultry to the piggery that he is doing. You know, if there is an offtake and he knows that after 6 weeks somebody will come and pick my 20,000 birds, he will get money to do that. Then beyond all this, government is also looking at the financial sector. How the financial sector can also drive this vision. So it's not only about the 4 million birds that we are going to give, but it takes a lot more investments from private sector, from the regulatory bit, so that you would be able to now drive the sector to produce more.
Doc, you have to come back. You have to come back because I'm being signaled that our time is up.
We need to talk about tomatoes,
no,
oil, palm.
You know, that's the thing about agric.
No, we have to bring you back.
We can talk about it the whole day.
But at least, if nothing, today you've managed to bully a few of us into agriculture. So that's one box ticked. We're certainly going to come back to this conversation and learn more from Dr. Otokunor. We're so glad that you made time this morning.